All right, so we're going to now move on to section 2 of this last module before our unit test. We're going to turn our attention to the progressives that are in the White House, and by which we really mean mostly Teddy Roosevelt, which is who we're going to focus on in this lecture. And we're going to look at what he does with the U.S. borders, and this is kind of what it's going to affect what happens domestically, but really we're going to focus on how he deals with foreign affairs. Now, Roosevelt is actually kind of an accidental president in that he is actually made president after the assassination of President McKinley, who was actually shot on September 6th of 1901. Now, McKinley did a pretty decent job trying to navigate some of the troubled waters of his presidency, right? He did kind of get wrapped up in that whole Spain and Cuba thing, but at this time, we've talked about the industrialization stuff. There's a lot of unrest with workers and working conditions and urban conditions and things like that. And there's a lot of people who are still living a life that is definitely less than ideal. And you have a lot of like anarchists. Like, I know that in today's world, we kind of have like this Antifa, right? And we kind of think of Antifa as anarchists, but like, and they're fairly uncommon, but like back then, anarchists were still fairly common. And this idea was really intriguing to people. And in fact, this guy, Leon Klausgause, I don't ever remember how to pronounce that guy's name, to be honest. He was a 28-year-old unemployed laborer. He was an anarchist. And he assassinates McKinley at the Pan American Expedition in Buffalo, New York. So Klausgause has, he's a disenfranchised worker. He was jealous at the time of some of these people that were doing better than him. He checks into the hotel. He poses as a worker at the hotel. McKinley goes up to shake his hand, and he goes and he slaps it away and shoots him twice with a revolver. Interestingly enough, crazy enough, the first bullet actually hit McKinley in his jacket button. And his jacket button actually like deflected the bullet in some ways. He kind of like, and then the second one hit him in the stomach. Yeah, and he would have lived had, medical, intervention been better at the time, but this is 1901. Because the bullet doesn't end up killing him. It kind of lodges in his stomach, but he gets an infection that's going to spread, and he eventually dies about a week later. Again, if it had happened today, he would have lived, without a doubt. I mean, easily would have lived. He takes McKinley's life, and then he gives his, this is from a quote from the friend of President McKinley. "I told William McKinley it was a mistake to nominate that wild man. I asked if he would realize what would happen if he should die." And they're talking about Teddy Roosevelt. Now look, that damn cowboy's president of the United States. Like, they're pretty upset that Teddy Roosevelt's about to be president. Now, Roosevelt, so McKinley was a Democrat. Roosevelt was actually a Republican. And so he had been put on the ticket to kind of shore up support, and he wanted to appeal to more, more extreme conservatives, I guess to some extent. And so you have, well, here's Klausgause shooting McKinley, put that gun right up to his belly and shot him twice. Sucks. Yeah. But yeah, that's the end of McKinley's tenure as president. And so this man is now going to be president, and we're going to get a few pieces of background information real quick. So, then we'll talk about all the challenges he faced. He's from a wealthy, influential family in New York, the Roosevelts, obviously. Pretty popular name for politicians, well-known family. But he had a pretty rough childhood. He was considered to be very sickly by most people in that day. He was constantly in and out of illnesses and not a very fit young man by any means. But he did end up going to Harvard. And while he's at Harvard, his father passes away while he's in college. So that was no good. After graduation, he ends up working in the state legislature. He's hoping to get into state politics there in New York. Unfortunately, by 1884, he ends up with the double trauma of losing his wife and his mother in the same year. His mom and his wife die in the same year. And you really can't even imagine how terrible that must have been. It's an unspeakably terrible year. And then, wait a minute, okay. This is actually a thing from his journal. It's a primary source here. It says, right here, X, the light has gone out of my life. His wife died on Valentine's Day, February 14th. So, dang. I mean, he had a rough year, guys. Like, really a rough year. So despite this really wealthy upbringing as a young man, losing his mother and his wife the same year, it gives us this very, tragic viewpoint of this man. And these things are going to set him on a very different course. These tragedies make things a little different for him. He needs to get away from all of this, right? He needs to kind of just escape. So he heads out to the Dakotas. And he says, I'm done with this politics stuff. I need to get away. I need to get away from this sadness. I'm going to go be a rancher. And he actually goes and he gets a ranch, and he becomes a sheriff for a couple years out in the West. And while he's out there, he kind of just becomes like a man's man. Like he's the dude, while he's kind of done out there, he kind of gets this aching, like, no, I need to go back and kind of honor my family. I'm going to go back and get back into politics. But he has this new perspective. He's actually been out West. He hasn't lived his whole life as this pampered lifestyle. He had money and he was wealthy, but now he's really experienced the world. He knows tragedy. He knows the plight of workers and average frontiersmen and regular people. So he returns to politics after that, after all this soul searching that he had done. And when he gets back, he kind of is very different. He's very eager to prove himself. But at that point, the Spanish-American War is going to be breaking out in Cuba. And so again, he's like, hey, I'm getting back into politics, but hey, I'm a man's man. I think I should fight for my country. So he enlists, and as we talked about in the last lecture, he kind of ended up being one of the big war heroes of that war. Leading the Rough Riders and all of that stuff. So when he comes back, this war effort, this war hero idea kind of propels him to become governor of New York. And so now you have this person that's kind of here that you can, he's very active trying to get rid of the Republican Party's corruption. And I had it mixed up. McKinley was a Republican. He wasn't. Or he is a Republican, but he's not a real Republican of the time. And that's going to show up because eventually he's going to break away from the Republicans and form his own party. So he's a Republican, but he doesn't really fit in with them either. He's more like he's more like the average person Republican. Remember, the Republicans of the time are very elite capitalist, pro-economic policy, pro-laissez-faire, pro-free capitalism, pro-business, not really for all the workers. He comes in and he's like, no, this is corrupt. I'm pro-worker, but I am a Republican. I believe in conservative values. I'm just, pro-worker, more, pro-union stuff a little bit. And so he's respected enough as governor and popular enough as a war hero that McKinley, as we said, when he gets elected, is going to choose him as his VP. And so he's going to have all these domestic reforms that are going to come about when he becomes president. And it's all going to be launched under the umbrella of what he calls the square deal. The idea that, whether you're rich or you're poor, you should all get a square deal in life, right? Like a fair shake. Does that make sense? Everybody should get a square deal. And he has three basic ideas. One, he wants to conserve natural resources. He was a conservationist. He believed in conservation, that we should preserve the beauty of America. Remember, he's been out west. He's gone to Yellowstone. He's gone to Yosemite. He's gone and seen these national parks and these national beauties, and he says, we need to preserve that, okay? Two, we need to control corporations, and three, we need consumer protection and worker protection. And we're going to kind of actually work backwards from this, because I think in terms of the nation, the way it was going, the most important of these is probably the last one, then we'll kind of go back. So the idea of the natural resources obviously is important to him, but we're going to look at the labor disputes first. So labor disputes in 1902, you have the United Mine Workers, the coal fields in West Virginia and Pennsylvania. They go on strike. They want increased wages, they want a 9-hour workday, and they want the right to unionize. Now, the bottom line here is that the mine owners think, well, they don't have any reason to give into this. Why should I give into any of your demands, right? I'll just bring other people into work, and the government has always backed us up. I'm not, we're not dealing with this. And so the mine owners, they have all the power, as we've covered in the past. They don't have to give in. And Roosevelt says, hold on, everybody. I'm going to mediate myself. Now, this is one of the things about his presidency that you should know is that he used the White House and his role as president, and he kind of develops what's known as the bully pulpit. And you might hear this as you get older and kind of, if you pay attention to politics, the president has what's known as the bully pulpit, in that if the president goes to the news and says, I'm going to make a speech today, the news is going to cover it, right? They're going to put it on every channel. They're going to stop doing whatever there was on TV. They're going to interrupt, hey, sorry to interrupt our broadcast, the president is speaking. And when the president does that, if he comes out and says, hey, we're doing something, most people in America are going to be like, oh, okay, well, then I guess we are. You kind of have this bully pulpit where you can kind of get up there and just say, hey, this is what we're doing. Well, he is going to do this to add government into economics so that he can protect the interest of people over big business, which is kind of the opposite of what had been happening. And this is what makes him really part of the progressive movement. He's not defining himself as a progressive, but the progressives certainly finally have an ally in the White House. And like I said, he's trying to rid this Republican Party of corruption. And he's actually become something more like a progressive Democrat in all actuality. But at any rate, he really starts these initiatives that are very much in keeping with the progressive goals. So he challenges these old ideas and the old ways of doing things. He decides he's going to finally mediate. And when it comes to labor, he sits down with the miners and the workers, and he basically is determined to come up with a solution that works. He invites the leaders to the White House, and he basically tells the mine owners, hey, I know that you've been allowed to do whatever you want with your workers, but that's done. So, if you don't work out a deal with them that is beneficial to both of you, the government is going to take control of your mine away from you. You will no longer own it. We will own it, and we will give them better rights. So, your two options are, you can continue to make money and treat your workers better, or you can make no money and the government will treat your workers better. Which one is it going to be? Well, guess what? The mine is like, well, I guess we could probably listen to them, I guess, then. Because they don't want to lose everything that they've built as a company, right? It's a big victory for labor. It doesn't achieve all of their goals, but most crucially, it defends their right to organize. And it shows that if a president is willing to, say, hey, we got to work together and talk this over, then it would happen. And presidents had not been doing this. Usually they just let the owners do whatever they wanted. And so this is really a big strike to the heart of the corporation. He also is very famous for trust busting. In 1900, trusts, which were basically legal bodies that were creating whole stock, they controlled like 80% of industry or something like that. They are very wealthy. They're continuing to get rich and richer because they're creating monopolies. And they have huge pieces of the economy just wrapped up in 25 businesses owned 80% of the economy. 25 companies owned 80% of industry. That's crazy, okay? So basically 25 people are making 80% of the money in the United States, okay? And so Roosevelt is actually going to file 25 antitrust lawsuits over this, and ultimately That's going to affect the railroad, the beef, the oil, tobacco, all of these things. And before Roosevelt, these antitrust policies were kind of just a paper tiger. You know, like they didn't have any teeth. Roosevelt says, no, we're going to give it teeth. And he's very cognizant of the problems, even in his own background, because he criticizes, you know, the wealthy class, but he was wealthy class, right? But he sees them as, you know, being exploitive to the public. Unlike him, who is using his wealth and status to help the public. He's saying, hey, you're supposed to be helping the public. Like, you're supposed to be creating something that's good for everybody and then helping everybody with it. He thinks that leaders of industry are too arrogant. And, you know, believe it or not, he really does a really good job. Now, for a while, the courts continued to side with businesses, but Roosevelt decides that he's going to take it into his own hand. He goes after J.P. Morgan, and so he's going after people that can really like hurt him, but he doesn't care. He's like, I'm going to do what's right. Roosevelt tells Congress, he says, there's a widespread conviction in the minds of American people that the great corporations known as trusts are in certain of their features and tendencies hurtful to the general welfare. So he basically says, trusts are bad. And you're just letting it happen. So now he's going to go after J.P. Morgan, his Northern Securities company. It's a holding company. It owns the majority stock in 3 major railroads. He has a virtual monopoly over railroad travel in the West, and Roosevelt says, we ain't going to do that. One person should not have control over everybody's ability to travel in half the country. That's wrong. So he goes after him. And through a series of Supreme Court battles, the Supreme Court orders the company to be dissolved. He makes them dissolve the company and sell it off into pieces. And again, this makes him a trust buster. And he did it in a way that, you know, he did not care at all. He just went after him. You see, this is, you know, Roosevelt, he said, tread softly and carry a big, or speak softly and carry a big stick, which is one of the greatest quotes by a U.S. president ever. Speak softly, but carry a big stick. So you say, hey, you need to quit taking advantage of people. Yeah, and if they don't, you take out your stick and beat them with it. Like, hey, you don't have to yell at people to get them to do what you want, as long as they know you mean business. So as long as you got that stick, which to him was the U.S. government, he's going to take out corporations with the courts. I don't have to raise my voice. I ain't going to raise my voice. I speak softly. And so it's really kind of funny. You know, again, you have those comic books and stuff. Another major initiative on the domestic front, he appoints the commission to study the meatpacking industry after Upton Sinclair's book, as we talked about before, The Jungle. You know, people freaked out, and he goes and says, hey, we need to go study this, and out of this legislation comes the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act, which is what forms our FDA. And, you know, in response to unsubstantiated claims and unwholesome products, Congress is going to pass the Pure Food and Drug Act. The act halted the sale of contaminated foods and medicines and called for truth in labeling. So look, cocaine toothache drops. Does your teeth hurt? Put some cocaine on them. They'll go numb. It won't hurt no more. Yeah. That is Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. It's something. It's like, hey, your baby won't shut up. Give them some of this. Probably like Benadryl. Just give your baby some Benadryl. They'll be quiet. Fall asleep, bro. Yeah, they're just advertising. It's kind of crazy. Again, conservation. Before this, the federal government paid very little attention to the natural resources. Roosevelt made conservation a primary concern for his presidency. He loved the outdoors. He believed that everybody should spend time outdoors. He believed that, you know, some of the things that he struggled with as a child, some of the health conditions, he truly believed were solved by spending time outside and playing in the sun, wrestling. He was actually a boxer. He was the first president to actually hold boxing matches in the White House, and he would participate. He was a boxer. I mean, he'd throw down. And this is like before rules, you know what I mean? Like, this is like, I mean, they had rules, but can you imagine, like, Joe Biden holding a boxing match, bro? Yeah, dude, that'd be crazy. Just anybody. I mean, can you hit an 80-year-old? Is that even legal? You punch him in the face, dude. I guess, yeah, that's true. Anyway, before his presidency, the federal government paid very little attention. But he makes it a primary concern. And so Roosevelt is eventually going to set aside 148 million acres of forest reserves, 50 wildlife sanctuaries, and adds several national parks. He is the world's foremost authority on North American wildlife. He actually created Yellowstone National Park during his presidency. He wrote a book on North American wildlife that basically was the preeminent book at the time of all the different animals and stuff living in North America. Like, this dude was a real deal, like, conservationist. And people think, like, and he was a hunter. I mean, he was a real hunter. He would go to Africa and hunt lions and stuff like he was a man's man, like, hunt buffalo. People think that hunters and stuff are not conservationists, but if you're a real hunter or fisherman, you know, or as Sam Smith would say, fisher them. Did y'all see that? Never mind. Not even going to talk about it. Talk about that. Yeah. So, yeah, that fishermen and hunters are conservationists. You hunt because if we don't hunt, it's bad for the wildlife populations in actuality. Again, Yellowstone becomes the largest and most famous. You can see here that he adds all of these places in green when he's in office. And so this is really a big thing. Grand Canyon, Mesa Verde, all of these things are during his time frame. So he is 100%, hey, protect the beauty of America. And that is really where we're going to leave off with the section.